Energy Shield has been strong in Path of Exile for many leagues at this point. In a previous video, I discussed how Ephemeral Edge, a unique one-handed sword that provides flat maximum lightning damage based on your maximum energy shield, and an item that was nerfed by at least 25% in 3.26, is still a completely irreplaceable item for many of the strongest builds in the current patch. But as important and powerful as Ephemeral Edge is right now, it's only part of the problem with Energy Shield being so strong compared to pure life options. Now, to be clear, the balance difference between Energy Shield and life is not quite as extreme in PoE 1 as it is in PoE 2 right now, and that's because there are a lot more options available and you can still make very strong pure life builds. But make no mistake about it, Energy Shield is completely imbalanced in the current patch, and many of the recent additions to the game have only compounded this issue. However, before we get into those, let's discuss the elephant in the room: Chaos Inoculation. This keystone sets your life to 1, whilst making you immune to chaos damage, bypassing the core mechanic of Energy Shield. That being that chaos damage normally bypasses this resource to deal damage directly to life. Now, I remember a meta in Path of Exile a long time ago when Chaos Inoculation was actually quite balanced. At that time, the cost of setting your life to 1 was a huge trade-off compared to being able to reserve your life, because Aura Stacker builds were some of the strongest endgame setups. But over time, Auras have gradually gotten a lot weaker, not only in terms of the effects that they provide, but also in regards to the mechanics of reservation, which have gone through several different iterations, and by now it's much more difficult to get enough reservation efficiency to be able to use anywhere near as many auras as you used to be able to run. With those changes, the value of being able to actually reserve your life went down, and naturally items like Prism Guardian were indirectly nerfed. Energy Shield even back then though was very powerful, it's just that it was exceptionally good due to hybrid aura stacking setups. CI was usable and did feature in some builds, but it was simply the inferior option in terms of late game scaling. And as aura stackers were nerfed patch after patch, CI remained, and gradually became more and more competitive. The other part of the keystone is the immunity to chaos damage. And again, a long time ago this wasn't an incredibly useful modifier. Chaos damage in Path of Exile was much rarer, and it was balanced in a way where you would pretty much know when you're going to be encountering this damage type. It would only really start to become a real threat deep into red maps and in specific well-telegraphed boss encounters. Non-CI builds had enough time and room to gear for encountering chaos damage, but in current Path of Exile this simply isn't the case anymore. Chaos damage is encountered much sooner in progression, it appears randomly on rare arch-nemesis monster modifiers, it's very often placed on modern league mechanics, think of Affliction League in the campaign or even the current Mercenaries League where you can run into chaos damage monsters very early on. And even though CI isn't typically used early on in character progression, the usefulness of being immune to chaos damage at any point has skyrocketed over time, because you simply cannot predict when you're going to run into it. But even more important than that is how much chaos damage monsters are dealing. Over time, power creep has, well, crept up. No pun intended. Player power is at an all-time high, but it's matched by content difficulty. Dangerous endgame content such as juiced up tier 17s and the newly added tier 16.5 maps are full of randomly encountered chaos damage monsters, not to mention the ridiculous monster modifiers that can roll on these maps. When the meta revolves around farming maps with many dangerous modifiers, being able to ignore some modifiers and even some monster types is incredibly powerful. But let's discuss tier 17s in a bit more detail because they're actually one of the major factors contributing to the current meta. Their introduction pulled the difficulty bar of endgame content up sharply, to the point where you need a very well-rounded build to even run this type of content. Tier 17s single-handedly narrowed build diversity in the extreme endgame, because whilst Uber bosses always felt like optional, aspirational content, inclusive of the fact that their loot only includes their exclusive drops, tier 17s simply are not the same, because even if the plan wasn't for tier 17s to replace 16s for endgame farming, that's simply not how it turned out. Tier 17s were the endgame farming spot, they produced the most loot by far, and it's not like Tier 16.5 maps really alleviated this problem, because they use the same extremely oppressive map modifiers as Tier 17s. And this is the single biggest issue with Tier 17 maps. It's not that they became the go-to farming spot, it's the map modifiers. They're so oppressive that the endgame becomes an arms race for whichever build can exclude as many modifiers as possible, and therefore is able to run as many modifiers as possible. Rolling maps less, progressing maps faster. This is also why Trickster is so potent right now, because the Ascendancy is able to exclude Tier 17 action speed modifiers, whilst also providing the basis for incredible ES stacking via Escape Artist. And this is where Energy Shield comes in, because when the difficulty of modifiers is that high, and there are so many dangerous modifiers that impact all kinds of different monster damage types and scaling vectors, such as projectiles, charges, or player maximum resistances, the best defense is no longer about defensive layering versus specific damage types. That plays a part, of course, but more importantly, it's going to always be about simply how much raw hit pool you can get, and there's no better way to scale raw hit pool than stacking Energy Shield. If you don't know exactly what you're going to be encountering, then stacking raw hit pool is the best option, and that's why Tricksters have dominated since the introduction of Tier 17s in patch 3.24. Now the other part of the problem is how you're able to stack so much Energy Shield. So let's discuss those base types. Here's a typical Royal Plate that's currently used on the most popular life-based builds such as Slams. And here's a typical Twilight Regalia, currently used on Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice builds for example, and a typical Necrotic Armor, mostly used on Trickster builds such as Smite. The power level of these items is not the same, it's actually not even close. The Royal Plate here provides a decent amount of life, but aside from that, the base defense, which is armor, and the additional physical damage reduction modifier provided, only improves defense against physical damage by default, and in the case of armor, that only works for physical hit damage. Meanwhile, the Necrotic Armor provides over 3 times as much energy shield than life from the Royal Plate, and still makes up a lot of evasion too, which works for any attack hit, not just physical damage. But more importantly, the Energy Shield, which is hit pool, useful against any damage type except for Chaos, which doesn't matter due to CI. Then of course there's the Twilight Regalia, which goes to the extreme with hit pool scaling, ignoring any kind of mitigation in favour of just stacking raw Energy Shield. A good Twilight Regalia will net you almost 6 times as much raw hit pool than the Royal Plate. And here's the thing. Physical damage from monsters is typically much less dangerous than elemental damage because it's balanced around a moderate amount of expected physical damage mitigation compared to elemental resistances. And that means that by stacking raw Energy Shield, you can essentially achieve 3 or 4 times the hit pool of an average life build, so instead of mitigating physical damage, you just outscale it instead, whilst becoming much tankier against all other damage types compared to life builds. The new base types that were added in 3.25 are simply out of control with how much Energy Shield you can obtain from them at the top end, and the changes that were made to improve life rolls from gear wasn't enough. In fact, it wasn't even close to enough. And then of course, we have the current patch, 3.26, which only widened the gap between Energy Shield and life builds even further. That's mostly because of the addition of memory-influenced maps, also known as 16.5s, which include the same oppressive Tier 17 map modifiers that I mentioned earlier, but this just means that more of the endgame is made up of the same requirements, further limiting build variety. And on top of that, the other very important addition this patch was Whispers of Infinity, which is completely ridiculous. There's not much else to say about this amulet. It provides about as much energy shield as a well-crafted helmet, or about 3 times as much as a tier 1 life roll. And of course, it unlocks the forbidden tech of being able to use Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice with Chaos Inoculation, which is the basis for one of the strongest builds this league. Now, there are a bunch of other factors at play here. For example, Jules being able to roll maximum resistances has meant that builds not on the left side of the tree are able to access maximum resistance scaling like never before, another knock to life builds. There's also Light of Meaning, which provides increased maximum energy shield, whilst the life version of this item for some reason provides flat life, and a very low amount of flat life at that. And really, this is a problem that extends far beyond Light of Meaning. The design of life versus energy shield is supposed to be that life as a resource is considerably easier to recover, and therefore the total amount of life you can reasonably obtain is lower. Meanwhile, energy shield is supposed to be considerably more difficult to recover in combat. This design is baked into the resource with the energy shield recharge mechanic that's delayed upon taking damage. This is what GGG are trying to go for right now in Path of Exile 2. The idea that you can obtain very large amounts of energy shield versus life, but recovering energy shield is difficult as there's limited or no energy shield leech or regeneration, so you're forced into investing into energy shield recharge. But in modern Path of Exile, this design philosophy is no longer true, and it hasn't been true for a long time. It's very easy to obtain substantial energy shield regeneration via Zealous Oath, whilst energy shield leech is also easy to access and scale, and this means that energy shield recharge as a mechanic, well, it essentially doesn't exist for most of the top builds in the game right now. They either disable it because they're using Ghost Reaver for leech, or ignore it because recovery is solved in another way. Energy shield recovery is not difficult to solve like it should be, which begs the question, why is energy shield scaling so high compared to life scaling? Because ultimately, life and energy shield are pretty much the same thing right now, only one is red and the other is blue. That's probably a bit extreme, but you get the point. Energy shield scaling is much higher than life, whether you're looking at the passive skill tree or on gear. For example, a life notable on the passive tree provides 10% increased maximum life, while an energy shield notable provides in the region of 10 to 18% increased maximum energy shield. This is also the same on gear, but notably increased maximum energy shield can roll naturally on some gear slots, whilst increased maximum life modifiers typically require an influenced modifier to be able to appear. But shouldn't this be the opposite way around? The amount of flat life that a life build can access is so much lower than flat energy shield. And this should somewhat be the case due to natural flat life gained from levels, but it's far too extreme of a difference. And at the same time, energy shield multipliers are generally a lot higher, not to mention intelligence as a scaling vector as well. And on the topic of scaling vectors, we need to discuss the mechanics that utilize raw hit pool to turn your defense into an offense. I already mentioned Ephemeral Edge at the start of this video, and I covered the issues surrounding that item in an entire video of its own because I do think that's a big part of the problem right now, but it's not the only part of the problem. There's also Energy Blade, and there's Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice too. All of these mechanics allow you to scale defense and offense at the same time while stacking energy shield. Now, Life does have access to some of these types of mechanics. There's Wrathpith Globe and Relic of the Pact, and there's also Bloodthirst Support. Now, Wrathpith Globe is a very strong item, however, note the differences between these options. Ephemeral Edge has no downside, as the downside is supposed to be the reduced maximum life, which is ignored due to CI. In fact, EE not only provides the flat lightning damage scaling, but it also provides a large increased maximum energy shield roll on top. Then you have Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice. The downside here is supposed to be the self-damage and the life cost, both of which are entirely avoided by CI and Whispers of Infinity. Compare those to Wrathpith Globe, which sacrifices 10% of your life every time you cast a spell, somewhat limiting cast speed scaling. Meanwhile, in the case of Bloodthirst Support, the downside here is that you must be low life. That means reserving Petrified Blood and dealing with its mechanics, or using your belt slot for Coward's Legacy, both options costing a lot of resources. And for Relic of the Pact, well, this item is much more niche, but you must reserve a bunch of your life in order to deal damage, and that means during the reservation, you've lost the majority of your hit pool. So, what's the solution here? Are energy shield builds too strong, or are life builds not strong enough? Well, I think the problems that led to this meta are quite complex, and the solution is likely not as simple as just nerfing energy shield base types. The game needs a serious balance pass at this point, and the headlining feature that must be addressed is surely tier 17 maps. They are the gatekeeper of build diversity right now, and one of the main reasons that Energy Shield is so superior. At the same time, Energy Shield needs a bit of an adjustment to its scaling. If GGG want to keep base types as strong as they currently are, then Energy Shield multipliers, namely the passive tree and intelligence stacking, will need to be toned down. Buffing life may not be a good solution, because there are a lot of mechanics that can get out of control very quickly. For example, Defiance of Destiny, which is already extremely strong right now. But with that said, life scaling could do with some tweaks, as it feels like the baseline of expected life on an average life build isn't quite enough to deal with the current endgame content. Life could also do with some more tools. There are options like Wrathpith Globe, which is very strong, but more options for life stacking wouldn't hurt. Overall, one of the things I want to see the most in patch 3.27 in October is a big balance pass targeting this issue. I would be happy with a bare bones league mechanic if we also got a meaningful balance pass to try and shift some of the focus off of Energy Shield stacking. But I feel like it has to include some changes to endgame content to make it more accessible for a variety of builds. Take a look at this poll that I put out yesterday in regards to the topic of this video. I asked how you would address the current state of the meta, and the large majority voted for life to be buffed to reach a similar power level as current Energy Shield. Now, I'm only able to add 4 choices to polls, but I think the solution here has to be a combination of the top 3 options. I'd agree that life buffs should be a primary focus, but I also feel that the top end of Energy Shield scaling is also too powerful right now, so that should be knocked down a peg or 2. But ultimately, endgame content also needs to be reviewed. Tier 17 modifiers must be addressed to allow for more build viability deep into endgame. I know that this is a pretty divisive topic, so let me know your thoughts by commenting below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.